What's up, guys? Welcome to Getting Fish. I'm Jax. I'm here to teach you guys how to fish a drop shot. So the drop shot's a lure that I basically just started fishing like these past 2 years. I haven't used it much before that. And although that may seem like I'm not been fishing very long, I don't know what I'm talking about. But I'll tell you this. I have not untied this drop shot from this spinning rod for the past 2 years. I've completely committed myself to learning this this technique these past 2 years. And I've learned a lot over that time. I have quite the collection of gear for it, and I'm very, very confident. It's probably my top confidence bait now. So yeah, without further ado, I'm just going to get into everything I know about drop shot fishing. We'll start off with the gear, and then I'm going to go into everything else, how I'm working it, where I'm fishing it, all that other stuff, all the good stuff. So if we're going to start with the gear, I'm throwing it in a spinning rod. Here I have a Daiwa Fuego. It's a nice spinning reel. It's like a $100 spinning reel. You don't have to spend this much money on a spinning reel. Any spinning reel will basically do. Although the more money you're going to spend on it, the better drag you're going to get. It's going to be smoother. And so the reason why I say you go with a 25 to 3,000 size reel is if you are getting a cheaper reel with not as smooth of a drag, it's better to get the larger size reel, because the larger size reel has usually it has a larger spool, and that makes for a much smoother drag. So yeah, that's the reel I'm using. Just a basic spinning reel here. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the line. So the line I use is it's Suffix 832 braid. I use braided line. Suffix 832 is just the line I've been using since I started drop shot fishing, and it's done great ever since. It's a well-known good braid to use. I use that in 10-pound. The color doesn't really matter, and I use it in 10-pound, but some people go up to 15 just to give it some extra strength. And since braid is so thin anyway, it really doesn't have an effect on your fishing ability with it. And then the other thing is, so since I use braid, I have to go to a leader. So usually I'm going to throw fluorocarbon. And so the fluorocarbon I use is just 8-pound Berkeley Vanish fluorocarbon. It's a very cheap fluorocarbon. And it works well for a leader. I don't use it for my main line for anything, but it works well for a leader. Just got to check it and replace it somewhat regularly if you have a lot of kinks in your line and stuff like that. But yeah, I do like that line for it. And then I guess, since I'm talking about the line, I might as well go to the rod. So the rod I have here is a Powell Inferno. It is a 7-foot... Ooh, this is actually 7'1". I did not know this was a 7'1". I thought it was a 7-foot this whole time. Okay, well, this is a 7'1" medium rod. It has an extra fast tip. And so what that means is there's a lot of flex in the tip, but it doesn't extend very, very far into the blank. And the tip, it does snap back pretty quick. It's not like a slower rod that really loads up more. It has a very quick tip, and it loads up very quickly. And yeah, this is just a great all-around rod. The extra fast is not so important. If you have a fast tip, that'll work just as well. I have some others. I have another couple spinning rods, and they both have a fairly fast tip, fast to moderate, somewhere in between there, and they still work well. At first, when I got this one, I was just used to the other rods, and I didn't like the fast tip. But now that I've been using it for a couple years, I really like it, and I'm not going to be going away from it anytime soon. But a slower tip will work as well. And so yeah, that's my rod, about 7 foot, and as long as you have a medium action, you're set. You can start drop shotting, and you can get some practice in and really catch a lot of fish with it. So that's the rod. Let's see, what else would I talk about? I guess we'll talk about the before I leave the rod subject, I just want to say this. I keep a rubber band around the butt of my rod here, in between the two grip sections, and that's just to keep my drop shot weight, because when I have it tied on, the drop shot weight is going to be hanging down, and if I don't have it hooked on to the end of the rod here, what's going to happen is it's going to get tangled around everything here, and it's just going to create a mess. So I keep it wrapped up around here with a rubber band, and it just keeps it out of the way for me. So next, now I'm done talking about the rod and everything, I'm going to go into the hooks in my bait. So the hooks I use, they're Yamamoto hooks. It's a finesse wide gap. So I use it in 2 sizes mostly. I use it in the size 2 and size 1. Size 2 is for my smaller drop shot baits, and size 1 is for a little bit larger drop shot baits. Very simple, and I keep a simple approach to my hooks. But there are some other good hooks by Gamakatsu. I think they literally have I think the Nico rigging hook is a good one actually. And they have a couple other good ones. I like Gamakatsu, just what I use. But any standard hook that's a finesse wide gap or about that style will do the job fairly well. So for my weights, there's a couple things I look for in my weights. First thing is price. I want affordable drop shot weights. I don't have any specific brands I use. I usually try to find the cheapest weights I can buy. And I just want to get cheap baits because on my home lake, if it's a good day, I'll go through 10 weights in a day. You go through a lot of them because I'm fishing them in rocks and places like that where I tend to lose a lot. And so that's why I like the cheaper weights. I don't use tungsten because of that. And the other thing I look for, and it's similar to the snagging issue, is I want the cylindrical weights because they come out of the rocks a little bit better than the round ones do. So I go through less of them, and those are just for like an economic point. It just makes more sense for me to try to lose less weights, if that makes sense. And so the size of the weights I'll use, I've been going back and forth a lot. I've been experimenting. Right now, I think I'm at a point where I use almost entirely 1/4 ounce weights, and that's just because I like the feel of it. The heavier the weight you have, the more bottom contact you have, and it's a lot easier to tell when you're on bottom, when you're off bottom, when you're on a rock, when you drag it off of a rock, stuff like that. And with the 1/8 ounce, you just don't have that feel there. And so that's why I'm sort of getting away from the 1/8 ounce and the lighter sizes. Now, the advantage of a lighter sized weight is you basically have a more natural presentation because when you leave slack in your line, the bait's not dropping quite as fast. So it is a little bit more natural. It can give the bait a little bit better action, but that's less of a factor for me than being able to keep bottom contact and knowing where my bait is and if it's in the right spot and it's around where the fish should be. And so that's where I kind of go as far as weights. Like these two I have, one of them, you see one of them cylindrical, that's my 1/4 ounce. And I don't care if it's curved like this or if it's straight. These are just what they had in the store at the time when I went to buy them. And so that's why I'm using these. But yeah, that's where I'm at. I use mostly 1/4 ounce. And I don't fish super deep water where I need to go heavier than a 1/4 ounce. So that's where I'm at with those. Alright, so I'm going to talk to you guys about the baits now. And the baits I basically break into two categories. The first category is the somewhat shorter baits, maybe 3 to 4.5 inch. And those are the smallmouth baits. And then the largemouth baits are basically like the 4 to 6 inch baits. Just because for the smallmouth I just want to use a little bit smaller baits, more compact. And so yeah, I'm going to break down my go-to and then sort of my alternative options that I also keep around. And my first bait is actually one of those baits that fits into both categories and it catches largemouth and smallmouth great. And that is the Zoom Z drop worm. Now this worm is one of the first drop shot worms I ever bought and I love it. It's basically just a little I think it's 4.25 inch maybe. It has a crosstail and it has a couple of big rib sections up towards the top. And it's just a great worm. It comes in only a handful of colors, but there are some really good colors. So that's sort of my first option there. I've caught a lot of nice largemouth and some pretty nice smallmouth too on that bait. And so yeah, that's that one. The next one I'm going to move on to, and that's sort of that bait right there. That's sort of my like day in and day out. Like that's if I'm just going fishing, that one's probably going to be tied on, and then the others are just in certain situations I'll switch to these other options I have. And so the next bait is this is my next one of my go-tos is the Yamamoto Shad shaped worm. And so this one I really like it if I know they're feeding on bait fish, if I know there's a lot of bait fish around, just because it has that profile a little bit better. It has that bait fish profile, and I know that it'll mimic them better. It'll mimic the bait fish a little bit better than these, and it just helps it to blend in a little bit more and seem more natural in the scenario. And so that's a great bait for those. These are very salty, so I tend to go through them pretty quickly, but they also have a ton of action. They're pretty good baits for that. And they're kind of a largemouth and smallmouth bait, but I use them mostly for smallmouth. And then this next bait I have, this is a real special one. This is the Strike King half shell. Now, this one is sort of a crosstail profile, but it also has that kicker tail that comes up in the back here. And so the way I think about this one is it really mimics bluegill, perch, crappie really well. It's just a very short profile, and this is mostly a smallmouth bait. It's a really great smallmouth bait, and so I love that profile where it comes up there. And I think if I know they're feeding on bluegill or perch or something like that, this is my go-to bait. Okay, so before I go in any further, I'm going to break down my colors. And so for smallmouth, I use 3 colors. I'm going to use a green pumpkin, which is just my standard. I'll throw that all the time during the summer, and quite a bit during the spring too. Then the next color I'm going to talk about is a morning dawn color, which is just a bright pink usually, and that's great in the springtime. And the reason for that, I think, is because when the bass are on the beds, a lot of times it's tough to trigger that strike. But if you throw that really bright pink bait in there, it's just a little bit more annoying, I think, to them. And I can't tell you how many times I've thrown this bait, or I've been trying to catch a fish on a bed with a drop shot, and I'm just throwing a natural colored lure like a green pumpkin, and they don't really want much to do with it. And then I put that morning dawn in there, and with 1 or 2 pitches, they smoke it. And so that's a great color for when the fish are up shallow spawning. It really gets a lot of bites during that time. And then once the spring ends and we head into the summer, I sort of drop that color, and then I start throwing the smoke color and silver color, just a bait fish color in general, because that just does a better job mimicking the bait fish. So whether it's alewives or shad or white perch sometimes, I'll use something like that to mimic them, and that tends to get a lot of bites during that time too. And so now I'm going to start moving into the other baits that I use. These are not really my go-to baits, but I do use them quite a bit. So these other baits I'm going to go through, I'm going to start out with the smallmouth ones, and then I'm going to move into my largemouth baits. And none of my largemouth baits are really my go-tos, because most of the time when I'm fishing the drop shot, I'm fishing for smallmouth. And so my first one I'm going to talk about is the Jackall Crosstail Shad. Now, this bait is you can see how much it's flopping over there, right there. It is a very soft bait. It has a ton of action in the water. This one's in a morning dawn color. I'm just going to put it down, because the one thing I kind of don't like about these baits is they are super slimy and they're covered in salt. So anytime I have to handle them, just a little bit annoying. But they are great baits and they have great action. That was a 3-inch in morning dawn. They also have the 4-inch. And so I use that bait once in a while when I'm fishing for smallmouth. That's a very small profile. When I know they're getting picky, I'll throw that one, and usually I can get some good bites with it. Next, I guess I'll say, is the Missile Baits Ned Bomb. And so this bait is originally a Ned rig bait. And so if you already fish a Ned rig a lot and you want to get into drop shot fishing, this is a great bait to start with, because chances are you could already have it. Or if you pick it up and you don't like it for the drop shot, you can throw it on your Ned rig and it'll get bit very well. So this one, it's just a great little bait. It has that beaver style tail, and that just has a lot of action in the water. It looks like the tail of a minnow kicking. This color is called Fishalicious. It's just a great smoke color, a little bit of purple flake. I really like this bait. And then I guess next I'll go into this is a very, very common, very popular drop shot bait. I actually have it tied on right now. This is the Strike King Dream Shot. Now this is in a color called, I forget what this is called. This is called Ghost Shad. And this is one of my top bait fish imitating colors, because it's fairly transparent, I guess is the word. It just looks great, especially if you get real clear water and they're feeding on bait fish. This is my color. It's just a great looking color. Just a nice 4 1/4. I think it's a 4 1/4 inch. Yeah, 4 1/4 inch drop shot worm. That's a great option for largemouth and smallmouth. And it's just a super popular bait. It just gets the job done. Plus, it smells like coffee too. That Strike King coffee scent. It's it's pretty good, pretty cool. And then these next few baits. Actually, this one still applies to smallmouth. But then I'm going to get into my baits that are a little bit more for largemouth. So actually, the next two will still apply for smallmouth. But the next one I'm going to say is just the 4-inch Senko. This one's pretty simple. If you like to fish a Senko, all you do, you throw it on your drop shot hook. Most of the time, I'm just going to wacky rig it. Green pumpkin, a white would work well too. and it's just a great bait for. It just has a little bit less action, and you just got to figure out what kind of mood the fish are in. If you're going out on a given day, just try a couple different baits. There are a couple different styles, and you should be able to figure it out. So this bait just kind of a dead action, and that Senko, it's a great lure weightless, but if you throw it on a drop shot, it's really nice especially if you're fishing in deep water, you know. So there's that 4-inch Senko. So the next bait I'm going to talk about is the Zoom Finesse Worm. Now this is in a color, I forget what this color is. Oh no, I got to check because I love this color. This is another one of those colors that I just see it and I'm like, wow, I got to have it, you know. This is called Smokin' Shad. Now it's basically a silver bottom with a translucent back and it's got some small blue flake in it. This thing looks deadly. I haven't fished it a whole lot, but you can just tell it's one of those colors that it just looks amazing. And the Zoom Finesse Worm, it's a tried and true bait. It's very popular, and the nice thing about a Zoom Finesse Worm is it's not a dedicated, you know, drop shot worm. You can throw it, and same thing with the Senko. You know, you can take this and you can throw it on a light Texas rig, on a shaky head, and so it's a little bit more versatile. So if you want to get into drop shot fishing, this is a great bait to pick up. So yeah, highly recommend this one. I'll fish it in green pumpkin, and since we're getting into the largemouth baits now, I guess I'll go over the colors for the largemouth. So for largemouth, I'll still keep that baitfish sort of color, and that's good, like I said, for when they're feeding on baitfish. Just helps to blend in a little bit more. And then, of course, green pumpkin, because you have to have green pumpkin. Then I guess the other one I would throw in would be like a June bug, if you're fishing in murky water. Because for largemouth, you can fish in murky water, and smallmouth, you're typically going to stay away from that murky water, but largemouth will live in murky water and feed in it and all of the above, and so that June bug, it's a nice dark color. It stands out when you do encounter that murky water. And I guess that brings us to our next bait is the Zoom Swamp Crawler. It's a fairly long bait. It's maybe a 5-inch bait. Let's see. Yeah, I think it's about a 5-inch bait. And it's a great bait. You could throw a wacky rigged or nose hook on the drop shot, and it gets a lot of bites. It's a great largemouth lure. I've had a lot of success with it recently, and so that's a great option. The other one is just the 5-inch Senko. Like I mentioned, the 4-inch Senko for smallmouth. I'll throw the 5-inch Senko for largemouth. And this is just a baby bass color. It's another great color for largemouth. And so yeah, those are basically my options. Now I mentioned briefly in there, though, I was nose hooking it or wacky rigging it, and I'm just going to go over the different ways you can rig a drop shot bait. And so here I'm just gonna demonstrate on this one. So there's a couple ways you can fish it. You can rig it. The first way, as you can see right here, is just nose hooking it. All you're gonna do for the nose hook is you're gonna take your hook. See right there. I don't know if you guys can see that. Yeah. And all you're gonna do, hook it through the nose. It's just gonna stick out a little bit, and that's just your stock way to fish it. This is really too big of a hook for this bait, but that's just the standard nose hook. That's what I do a lot of times. But if I'm not going to do that, the other ways you can rig it is basically a wacky rig. Now, most people know what a wacky rig is, but I'll just demonstrate here. And that's all you're doing with that one, is you're just going to hook it in the middle. And that's another good option. And the third way to do it is something I saw Aaron Martin's talking about. That's sort of, I forget what he called it, but you want to sort of hook it in between the nose and the middle. So it has a very unique action. It doesn't spiral at all on the way down like other rigs will for the drop shot. And it's just a very unique action. So a good way to find out what fish want that day is you take one drop shot bait, you fish with it nose hooked for a little while, you fish with it wacky rigged, and then you fish it in between the wacky rig and the nose hook, and you just see what the fish want, which ones they seem to be eating better, which ones you get more bites on, stuff like that. So those are the three ways that I'll rig it. The only other way is a Texas rig, and so oh shoot, it's coming undone. And so with a Texas rig, all you do is you use a Texas rig style hook, an extra wide gap, and you rig it weedless, and then you tie it on like you normally would. And the way you tie on a drop shot, I should have explained this earlier, but all you're going to do is you're going to tie a standard knot to your hook, whatever knot you like to use, and then make sure you have an extra long tag end. And then that tag end, you're going to attach to your weight. And most of the weights on the market have this the clip-in feature that you can use, and so that's basically how you rig it. So now that I've talked about all that, I'm just going to go into where I'm fishing the drop shot bait. And for me, I fish it shallower than most people fish it. Drop shotting is often thought of as a very deep water tactic, and I've had some success in deep water, but it works really well if I'm pitching it up shallow. Like I said, spawning fish, they'll drop shot very well on a bed, because you can kind of just, you can leave that weight on the bed, and then you can just shake the worm over top of the bed, and you can get a lot of bites like that. And so I do fish it shallow quite a bit, go down some good stretches of the bank, and you can just pitch it up there just like you would pitch a Texas rig or a different type of soft plastic, and just work it back towards the boat. The other two places I like to fish it, and I've caught some big bass, big smallmouth specifically doing this tactic, is I'll go off the end of points in deep water, maybe 10 to 20 feet of water. I do that a lot, and I've caught some deep smallmouth like that on the drop shot. And so that's one way to do it. And then the other place I'll do it for smallmouth is around the ends of docks. So if I get a deep dock that extends out into maybe 25 feet of water, I'll pitch to the end of the dock, and the fish will suspend up underneath the dock, but they'll be down deeper. So that drop shot, as it passes them, they'll usually follow it down and hit it before it gets to bottom. And so I've caught some big smallmouth doing that these past couple years. And the other thing I would say about location is rock is important. The smallmouth like to hang around the rocks, and so I'll tend to target areas that have more rock, and just transition areas, just general areas that you would think fish would hang out more in. If you have a rock pile or a stone row, stuff like that, you want to target those areas, obviously. Yeah. Okay, so lastly, I think this is going to be the last thing I talk about, is how I'm working this drop shot worm. And so basically I'm going to cast it out or pitch it out. A lot of times if I'm fishing offshore, I'm just going to take small pitches just to keep that line more vertical and keep the bait off bottom more. And how I'm going to work is I'm just going to pitch it out, and there's a few ways to work it. I'm going to feel for when the weight is on the bottom. So when I know the weight's on the bottom, I'm just going to let a little bit of slack, just maybe move my rod, a couple inches. And then I'm just going to drop it a couple inches once the line's tight and the weight is on the bottom. And I'm just going to shake that worm from that point. And so what happens is the bait sinks down, and then it's just going to shake, and it just gives it some room to move. The other way to work it is to move the weight and the worm at the same time. And so that one's okay, but it usually causes you to move the bait towards you more. And so the first way I mentioned, where you leave the weight on the bottom and you just shake the worm, that's good for if you fish in a concentrated area and you want to leave the bait in that area for a while. You can just kind of sit there and either dead stick it or just drop your rod and just give it a little bit of a shake. And then the other way is just, you can shake it back to the boat, hop it, stuff like that. Just the general stuff you'd do with any Texas rig, jig, or other soft plastic. And just work it back to the boat that way. And another way I fished it that I actually had some pretty good successes. Alec is actually behind the camera, and the one winter I was at his house at his pond fishing a drop shot. Do you remember this? Where I took the rod out and I pitched it near the end that had the spring in it, because that's where the warm water was. And I knew the fish were not in a very good biting mood, and so I was shaking it for a while. And I wasn't getting any bites. And then what I started doing, I actually had a Zoom finesse worm, and it was in a watermelon color. And I would pitch it out in an area where I thought the fish would be. I'd leave it there, and I'd just keep the line tight, and I'd just leave it there. And I'd wait until I felt some just ticks on the line, and once I did that, I just kind of reeled down and loaded the rod up, and we're actually catching crappie, just giant crappie. But the same theory would apply to bass. If it's really cold water, you just keep the line tight and just dead stick it, and that's a great way to catch them if you have very cold water. And so I think that's about it for the baits that I talked about and all that. So just thank you for watching this video. If you want to see me make more videos like this in the future, leave a comment down below. Subscribe to the channel if you'd like. And yeah, hope you have a great day. I'll see you soon.